You've heard AM, you've heard FM. Now, tune into DM Radio, the world's longest running show about data. Each week, host Eric Kavanaugh interviews the brightest minds in the world of information management. Want to be on the show? Send an email to info@dmradio.biz. Now, here's your host, Eric Kavanaugh.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, hello and welcome back once again to the longest running show in the world about data. It's called DM Radio. Yes, indeed, yours truly, Eric Kavanaugh here. And folks, we have, again, hot topic. We're going to talk all about data mesh today, and I'm super excited about the panel we have put together here. My good friend, Mike Ferguson, who I've known for 20 probably years or so in the industry, very knowledgeable analyst and consultant as well. So he's a practitioner. He goes out and does this stuff. He doesn't just talk about it. We've also got a newbie, Adrian, Estala from Starburst. And these folks are doing very, very interesting work. A bunch of Teradata folks, I think, went out and created Starburst, and they're doing some work in the analytics space, helping with what amount to federated queries. This thing called Presto is out there. We may talk about that a bit on the show. And he's a former longtime practitioner. So he was at Shell for a long time, CDO there, in fact. And he said anytime he gets the warm and fuzzies to do something new, he gets excited. And that's when he jumped over to Starburst recently. So we'll talk about that. And then my good buddy, Ben Fan, also from Alluxio, very interesting technology company that spun out of the whole big data movement. So we'll find out some fun stuff from him. But the topic is data mesh. And so what is data mesh? It's a very interesting concept. There are several key tenets to it. One of them is self-service. You want to enable self-service. But one of them is really federated data management and domain-specific data management. So you let a department or a certain group manage their own environment, which is rather different from the old way of building a data warehouse and pulling everything into there. Well, we learned along the way somewhere that you couldn't get everything into the warehouse. And so that's when data lakes came into the picture in the big data, the NoSQL world, frankly. And it's kind of funny because we almost made the same mistake again. So like, no, let's put everything in the data lake. And then that didn't work out too well. For some people it does, but it becomes a bit unwieldy, quite frankly. And there's just been a whole lot of innovation in this space. So then data mesh comes along as a way to, I think, kind of bridge that divide a little bit to give the control to the departments to enable self-service, but still have a sort of underlying fabric, if you will. And so some folks like our buddy Bruno Aziza will say you need a data fabric to do a data mesh. But we'll talk all about that on the show today. And with that, I'll hand it over to Mike Ferguson. Mike, tell us a bit about what you're working on. I guess you're the co-chair of this big event in London, which is exciting. But tell us, what do you think data mesh is really, and why is it popular now?
Okay, thanks, Eric. Thanks for the invitation to be on the show. For me, I really think data mesh has come about because of pretty well a major problem. I mean, a lot of my clients, at least, were running with different sort of standalone analytical systems. I mean, you talked about data lake there, you talked about data warehouse, you may have other types of NoSQL database using an analytics like graph databases, you may have streaming analytics, etc. But what was going on in all of those environments was like a separate data integration tools to be able to prepare and integrate data for each of those individual systems. So kind of like a siloed approach. And then, so what happened is that you got different people often using different tools in different silos, and repeating the whole approach of integrating data again and again, often from the same data sources. In addition, the folks in the middle were, who are doing this kind of work, whether they're IT pros or even in some cases data scientists, really quite some way from where the source data is necessarily used. And with more and more data sources coming on board, and more business users around the business demanding access to data for analytics and insights, the folks in the middle are just becoming a bottleneck, in all honesty. And so not only we got siloed systems and repetition of tools and integrating the same data repeatedly a lot of the time, so a lot of, let's say, redundancy in there. And then at the same time, we got a bottleneck going on because more and more data, not enough people to do the integration centrally. And so naturally, to me, I mean, it's like, well, why can't we decentralize the development of pipelines to produce data? And also, why do we have to build one huge data store each time. Why can't we build a kind of more like a component-based data development? So we build these, if you like, data components in data mesh they call data products, which you can kind of incrementally build up a list of with different teams in different parts of the business doing that, and then kind of allow folks to pick the ones that they need for the analytical use case that they have. And so the idea being is I can build it once and reuse it everywhere. And so stop reinventing. I think but there's a lot of challenges with it. I think one of the biggest challenges, in my opinion, is if we're going to do this, the challenge is how do you get everybody out there with the skills to be able to do this kind of work? And so I kind of think the challenge from let's say a centralized IT environment is to admit that there's no way they're going to keep pace with demand, but at the same time, coordinating all of this development going on across the enterprise, understanding who's building what data products for what purpose, and how it's going to kind of contribute towards achieving a business goal. Like if you're trying to improve customer engagement, or you're trying to reduce fraud, or you're trying to optimize a supply chain, well, then what data products should we be building and who's building them? And then, so not only coordinating that, but upskilling all of those folks so that, we do get a hell of a lot more people around the organization that are perfectly comfortable and capable of doing this kind of work. So I think we're trying to break a logjam here. We're trying to get rid of far too high cost of data integration. We're trying to shorten the time to value by reusing. So build once, reuse everywhere, rather than everybody build for their silo. Mm-hmm. And at the same time, we're trying to get far more teams doing it. I think from most people's perspective, a lot will depend on the culture of your organization. If you're very highly decentralized in a way, this kind of fits to some extent with the kind of way in which your organization may operate. And I've got several clients that are very highly decentralized organizations. But I kind of think as well, companies will, are okay with this as long as they're getting, as long as they're not fueling 20 different versions of the same thing coming out of 20 different parts of the business. What they kind of want is coordinated development of people building stuff that's going to, if you like, knit together to solve different analytical problems and shorten the overall time to value. So to me, I think it's very much about a cost reduction. It's about speeding up development, and it's about reuse. But at the same time, in order to stop it going off track, so to speak, I kind of think it's also about coordination. So I really put a high priority on the whole organizational side of this. And in fact, just next week, I've had a request from 7 CDOs.
Oh my goodness!
To say, could I just tune into a meeting with them and take them through the organizational implications of this? So, because I think all of these CDOs are recognizing, yeah, we can go out and buy the technologies and everything like that, but they're far more worried about the soft side of this than the technology side. They kind of feel that organizing this and coordinating it's going to be just as important as anything else in order to, so everybody kind of knows who's building what. So the whole thing ultimately stitches together a bit like the front of a jigsaw box, you know what I mean? And so I think that's definitely going on. So and at the same time, there's another trend here, which if you look around, it's happened already in software development. We went from monolithic applications.
I was going to go here. Yeah, go ahead.
Right.
This is good. I was going to say something.
We went from monolithic applications to microservices, and what we're seeing now. So in a way, we went to component-based development. We're seeing exactly the same thing moving into data and analytics, whether it's data model components, pipeline components that are orchestrated together in a data ops pipeline. We're trying to automate things like automated testing, automated deployment, infrastructure as code, all of those things in order to shorten the time to build, get collaborative development going on, and get stuff out the door. Mm-hmm. but also to find a way to, I guess, publish what's being created so that people can ultimately shop for data products that they need for their,
Right.
but equally then quickly assemble ready-made into what they need in order to deliver value. I mean, the last thing you'd want is, if you produce data products, is to then find that somebody's then got to do even more work on top of that in order to use what's being created. I kind of think what people want is, it's almost like akin to Lego bricks. You know, I mean, I want to grab these pieces, snap them together, start analyzing and delivering value. And so I kind of look upon this as, we've got data product producers on the one side, which we're trying to get more of, with the skills needed to do it, who are closer to the data sources. And at the same time, we're trying to encourage sharing, without violating compliance and all those kind of good things. But at the same time, ultimately, the end of the day is, can you shorten the time to value? Can you actually accelerate this and speed people up? Because 60% or 70% or 80% of what they need is ready made. Rather than, what data am I going to use? I have to go through all these sources. It's like, oh my God, I got all these data products ready made. That's cool. I don't have to go and do this stuff. I can just grab that. And when that's related, so I can grab that, snap it together, start analyzing and delivering value. And so I kind of think this decoupling of producers versus consumers is a good idea. But I do think, from a corporate perspective, CDOs are concerned about not ending up in a Wild West environment. What they're concerned about is, how do we coordinate this, make sure we're delivering on strategic business goals, to hit high priority targets and stuff from a business point of view. So nobody's losing track of that. And so one of the big things coming out of a lot of my consulting at the moment is, CDOs are creating what I would call a program office. Nothing new there, but it's like a nerve center. It's kind of like everybody knows which projects are going off for what purpose. Everybody knows which teams around the enterprise are building what. And so it also gives those teams around the enterprise a view of the bigger picture, as well as, you know what I mean? It works both ways. It works from a management perspective, trying to keep track of all of this, but it also works from the individual team's point of view to know, well, which piece of this puzzle am I building, right? And so for me, I'm definitely finding in my consulting that, the executives are real worried about organization. They're not worried about technology, and they're really keen to upskill.
That's right.
But I think CIOs are really concerned, is realizing that there's an enormous impact on IT in order to push expertise into those parts of the business to drive up those skills in order to get those folks delivering, right? I mean, so I kind of think there's a hell of a lot more to this than just the tech side of it or the architectural arguments. To me, it's, I mean, if you think about it today, when you build software, how frequently do you see a vendor coming out with a new release? It's almost on a daily basis, sometimes even shorter than that, because they added a new microservice, or they popped this one out and popped that one in. And so their ability to continually deliver more and more functionality, yeah, absolutely, is there. And I think same thing's happening in data now, which is, can we break this thing apart and start building components, which ultimately is going to end up with people getting faster and faster and faster to deliver, because 60, 70, or 80% of what they need is ready made, and they don't have to go build it. I mean, that's the way I look upon this.
Yeah, and that's a tremendous overview, folks. You just got there from Mike Ferguson, and we have a couple of great questions already from our virtual audience coming in here. And folks, if you want to be in the virtual audience, hop online to dmradio.biz. You can register to watch these live and get your questions answered. And Adrian, Estala, I'll bring you in from Starburst. Mike did a fantastic job there, just kind of giving a whole description of what this thing is, where it's coming from, what it's doing. I think it's very exciting because we do have the component parts from a technological perspective to start creating these things. But to Mike's point, there's a huge impact on organizational hierarchies and how you do things. And we see lots of examples of how we learn lessons from DevOps and now data ops. And frankly, I was just at the Snowflake Summit, and quickly a company called DataOps.live gave a presentation with Roche, pharmaceutical company, about how they modernized their whole data processing environment. And they went from releasing one new release every 2 to 3 months to 120 releases in a month.
Yep, I'm familiar with their model. It's fantastic. What pharma is doing, specifically that R&D space, I think they have some of the most mature data meshes that I've seen. And we can learn a lot from them. So yeah, Roche has a really, really nice one. So hey, Eric,
you of course, go ahead. You're a CDO, a former CDO, and you talk to CDOs all the time. So this is front and center for you. What's your take on it? We got about 3 minutes before break. Go ahead.
Oh, give me Adrian 3 minutes. That's tough.
We'll bring you back after. We'll bring you back in the second segment.
I was like, it's the hardest thing you can do for me. But first, Mike, really, really good overview. Let me tackle a couple of points, and we can dig further after the break. One is what's different about data mesh right now. We start thinking about the skills side, right? Is that there is hunger in our business teams, in our analytics consumption teams. There's hunger to do more on their own, right? So they want to build the skills, learn the skills. They want to do it, right? So there is an urgency, there's a hunger, there's a want, right? So I'm not forcing change on them. There's a need there, right? They would prefer to. It's amazing what happens when you give somebody the keys. The perception of speed, when you control how fast you want to go, is pretty incredible. The skills required for data mesh, just from a technical perspective at least, and it obviously varies. I always talk about a data mesh as an ecosystem. There's a lot of tools. You can have a Starburst sitting right next to a Snowflake. We see that quite a bit, right? And so it's an ecosystem when you think of a data mesh. But certainly, at least with what we do, there isn't a lot of new skill required, right? They're skills that you already have. So you're not building new skills, you're leveraging existing skills, and even better, you're teaching consumers to do it on their own, right? So on the skill side, absolutely, Mike, I think it's a great point. But I think if you think about how you implement it, you realize, actually, I'm not actually teaching anybody anything too difficult, or there are things they already know. On the other side of it, I think when we start thinking about the kind of the broader organization pieces, I don't know that you roll out a data mesh to everybody all at once. I think what you do is you focus, and what's special about a data mesh, but the way it's designed, this domain-focused model, is that you focus in the areas that are going to create the value, and you can build with a Pathfinder a very quick data mesh for a team and create immediate value. You don't have to do it for the company, right?
That's very important. No doubt about it. You always want to get the quick win. You have the big picture in mind. You know where you want to go. You know what the desired outcome is at some point in the future. But you must start small. You must prove it out, and also work out the kinks in the processes, right? Because you're going to find, like Mike said, according to your organizational culture, you're going to find different roadblocks along the way. But don't touch that dial, folks. We'll be right back. You're listening to DM Radio.
Welcome back to DM Radio. Here's your host, Eric Kavanaugh.
All right, folks, welcome back here on DM Radio. We're talking all things data mesh today with Mike Ferguson from Intelligent Business Strategy. We've got Adrian Estala from Starburst, and also Ben Fan of Alluxio coming up next. But I'll throw it back over to you, Adrian, to give us that 30,000-foot view you were talking about of what data mesh means and how it's really for the business, not for the technical side. Go ahead.
Absolutely. By the way, I love the vibe of the show. I feel like we should be talking college sports, College World Series, Texas A&M, something. I don't know, but it's a great vibe.
Blocking and tackling, yeah.
Hey, something Mike said earlier that it really resonates. I think you hit it right on, Mike. You talked about it's about time to value. And when you think about time to value, that's what the business cares about, right? They don't really care about where the data came from. They don't care about the pipeline. They don't want the excuses about metadata or APIs. They just want to get to their data. And so that's super important. But before I kind of dig further into that, let's start with that 30,000 feet, Eric. I think we can, by the way, if anybody wants a book, maybe we add a link to let everybody log in. We offer kind of free books, so to speak, or free digital copy of the inventor of data mesh, Zumach. You can get a book and kind of read the details. But when you read the book, you'll realize there's a lot there, right? And it's a great vision, right? But nobody's implemented the book yet, right? What I mean by that is most of us are still kind of in the early maturity phases. Even some of the most mature data meshes that I've seen, they haven't gone all the way to a fully, federated computational governance, right? The way the book describes it. We're not there yet. Right. I like to describe it in 3 steps, right? And what I'm seeing based on everybody that I'm talking to, right? The first step of any data mesh is the idea and the principle that you're leveraging the data where it is, right? If you're building a data mesh and somebody's saying, let's migrate your data here, not sure that's the right approach, right? There may be reasons to migrate data, but you should not be migrating your data as a design point for a data mesh. Data mesh,
That's right.
number one, leave the data where it is. You want to
Right.
access the data where it is. That's your first point. And I'll tell you what, a lot of companies that are building data meshes, that's the first big win. I've seen data meshes where they show it to me and that's all they've done. All they've done is connected to a number of decentralized services. Somebody asked a question about data fabric. A data mesh and a data fabric are very similar in that first step. We're just connecting decentralized sources, right? Huge win for a lot of companies. Companies that choose to take the next step then realize, now that I've got all this data and now that I don't really care about the sources, what I care about is the consumer. Now we're taking a step forward, right? So data fabric is about connecting and data mesh about connecting. Data mesh takes the next step and says, now let's organize all this data in a way that my consumer understands it. Yeah, I like to say, get the architects out of the room and bring the consumers in. Not really. You also you want everybody in the room, but
Right.
you want to listen to the consumer, right? And so if you're talking to a finance team, you're talking about a finance domain. You're talking to a merchandising team, you're talking about a merchandising team. Maybe you're talking about anti-money laundering, you're talking about an AML domain. You want to organize the data in a way that makes sense for the consumer. That's
Right.
the domain. I'm not moving data into a domain or migrating data into a domain, right? It's a logical representation, right? It's just you want that person to come into the room and say, I've created a domain that makes the most sense for you, for the types of analytics, the types of business problems you're solving. That's step two. Step three is the most important piece, because once you've got them working in a domain, then you want to start to create data products. And there's a lot of different types of data products, right? And so, Mike, you brought up some good points about treating data products as a microservice. And I had that same line of thought early on. But what I'm seeing more and more is I do see some data products that are stable. You work with a team that they're driving the same kinds of analytics all the time. We've created data products for them that are reusable, that are interoperable. There's a consistency and a quality to them. Fantastic. Beautiful. I have other teams, and this is where I think the real magic for a data mesh is. The teams that are driving the real value are the ones that are discovering. They don't know what data products they need. And as I always say, there's no such thing as a perfect data product, because when you build it for someone and you show it to them, we've all been there from a data side with it. You show it to the business and they say, that's not what I wanted. What's missing? The magic is when they say, hey, can you add this table? Can you get rid of that table? Can you add this other source? And you do it right in front of them.
Yeah, right. That's right.
Is that what you wanted? That's the magic.
That's a great way to put it, because now, and I think this is part and parcel to what we're seeing in the data ops space, right? Because we have DevOps, we learn a lot from that. I mean, I think a lot of the innovation we're seeing in this regard came from the positive results we got from DevOps, where first you said this big IT business divide, right? And then the data was sort of I won't call it an afterthought, but it was there, but it wasn't a first-class citizen, let's say. And then with DevOps, what do you have? You got developers working directly with the operations people to solve problems. And I think then what happened is, well, they got a lot of great stuff done. I'm like, well, whoa, wait a minute. We forgot about the data side. Let's focus on that. So now we're really getting a maturity around how we manage data. And we're treating it like one of the things the guy from Data Ops Live said was, do you want anyone to be able to do a manual update in here? And the answer is no. Or testing, manual testing. You do manual testing? No, you're not going to do manual testing in this environment. It's all going to be automated. That's just one little piece of the puzzle here. But the point being, you want to automate as much as possible to the point where you can just sort of drag and drop these things, to your comment there, to create the magic. The magic happens when someone realizes something, right? When someone goes, oh, wow, we call it the aha moment, right? And if you can work with your business leaders or even your frontline business folks and just right there in a session, make these changes, that's a huge deal, right, Adrian?
It's incredible, right? And now all the CDOs and data governance people in the room or on listening are saying, well, hold on a second, Adrian, you're making a lot of assumptions. You're assuming we have great metadata. You're assuming we have great data quality. We're assuming we have access to all the data. Those problems don't go away. But here's what I will tell you, right? So as a CDO, I've been there. I've been trying to fix data quality across a lot of different data sets, right? It doesn't matter how many contractors you bring in to fix that problem. You're never going to get there. Change the lens, right? If you now start to focus on data products and you start to focus data quality and metadata and governance and access on data products, you're focusing your efforts, you're applying the efforts that create the greatest value, and your business will actually notice the results, right? And so we still have to do all the things we've been talking about, but now we're starting to focus on the areas that matter most on the front end, so to speak, right? And once, to your point earlier, Mike, once you create it and you get it right, now you can start to reuse it. In that discovery phase, you're going to discover bad data. You're going to discover data that no one understands. That's part of discovery. But the fact that you're now able to access it, and your data product owner should be tied to the consumer or tied to the business, right? They're not, and I'm an IT person as well, so let me not, talk bad about IT people, but when you bring a business person in the room to work with their own data, they understand. They're like, oh, I know what that is. That's this. And they can help you with the metadata. They can help you fill in the blanks. That's pretty powerful. Yeah.
Yeah, it sure is. A whole lot of pieces have to come together correctly, like Mike was saying, like a jigsaw puzzle, basically. And there are some concerns around data silos. We got a number of questions here from the audience, like, well, aren't we just kind of going back down the old road of data silos? And to a certain extent, you are, but nonetheless, you're trying to, well, change the role of the IT person. I heard someone say from gatekeeper to shopkeeper.
Yeah.
Right. Because in the old days, you're the gatekeeper primarily because IT was just so worried about keeping the trains running on time. Yeah. Right. There's this fear of like, oh, don't touch anything as it's going to break. But now we have much more robust infrastructure. You got infrastructure as code, for example. So all the underpinnings have kind of matured to the point where this stuff is genuinely, it's almost there, let's say, or it's certainly possible. What do you think, Adrian?
No, without a doubt. And on that point, let me just very quickly, I know we want to get to some of the questions, kind of talk about how people are implementing. I think that's something that a lot of people are curious about. We think about big transformation exercises and how painful those are and how difficult those are. We've been doing them for a long time. You mentioned DevOps a second ago. We have some tools today that give us an advantage. We have agile working, right? We're working in sprints now. We have a DevOps model, right? We're building iteratively in terms of MVPs. And so those give us an incredible benefit to start small and iterate quickly. The way that I see, implementations succeed, I call it a pathfinder, a 90-day pathfinder. In a 90-day pathfinder, you're focused on three things: building a data mesh strategy, implementing an MVP, and enablement. You're training a small set of users, right? The training is really important. You can't build technology without training a data product owner and a domain owner and a consumer. But what we do in that middle phase, in that implementation phase, is actually two parts. One thing that I would recommend everybody is to do a fast pilot. It's going to take you a little bit, depending on what you're implementing, whether it's Snowflake or Starburst, right? We like to say we'll implement faster, but depending on what you're implementing, it's going to take a while to get that implemented as you go through all the architecture review and InfoSec review. You don't want to wait till the end of that to bring the people in the room. What I like to do is I do a quick pilot, right? I go in there and I implement a quick, give me 2 weeks. Let's get a light product installed. Let me access a couple of data sources. We get that installed very quickly. And then I bring the consumers in the room right away. So by the second week, I'm working with consumers and I'm showing them data products and I'm showing them a domain. And I'm getting them used to how this actually works, because it's not the technology that's going to impress them. It's the data that's going to impress them. And so you want to understand how they use data. You want to understand where they get data from. We want to understand the questions they have. Can you add this? Can you add that? And so if I'm doing a 90-day Pathfinder, I want to spend 60 days with the consumer, teaching them, working with them, and adding value. The outcome of that is an MVP. It's a production version of a data mesh with maybe 1 or 2 domains with a 6 or 12 data products that other people come in and say, you demystified it. That's how it works. Yeah, that's how you use it. And again, I'm not trying to shortcut all the other governance issues and so forth you have to deal with, but once you create that momentum and people understand the value of data products, then they're more willing to come in and say, okay, now let's work together on the governance. Now let's work together on the other pieces.
Yeah, I think. Go sorry. Ahead. No, I mean, it's not all sweetness and light here. I mean, let's be clear about this. I mean, you can't just say it's turn a handle and we have a data mesh kind of deal here. I mean, we've been through this before. I mean, if you go back to the kind of 2014 time frame, 2015, we had this whole wave of self-service data prep. And then, we had a whole ton of these self-service data prep tools emerged, sold into the business. BI tool vendors added that kind of capability. And then everybody was sitting in front of tools where they could connect to data and prep whatever they wanted to do. But I think the problem that happened there is we got the Wild West. Mm-hmm. And if you thought you had a lot of silos, after that, we ended up with even more because nobody knew what anyone else was creating. I can always remember a quote from one of my clients when we did a review, and the CDO said, everybody's blindly integrating data with no attempt to share what they create. And it was true. I mean, you know, people were using a multitude of tools and building their little world, and nobody, you know, there wasn't any vehicle to publish this anywhere. If you used lots of different tools, the assumption, there's an awful lot of assumptions out there. Well, we got lots of different tools. People can build data products with whatever tools they like, and then we can just share stuff. But this isn't just about sharing data, it's about sharing metadata. And the problem here that I see is there's still, in all my career, 40 years of it now, there is still no industry standard to share metadata between any tool and anybody else.
Yep. No one's going to fix that metadata problem. Yeah.
So the assumption that you can just, put the metadata up here, it's all self-discoverable, and any tool can just go in there and get it. Not true, because there is no standard to share this stuff. And so there's a big argument going on here at the moment, which does bring in that buzz phrase, data fabric. You know, should I go and give tools to everybody, let them all go and buy their own tools and let them all go build data products in their part of the business and just put them all up there and share? It's all going to snap together like Lego.
I'd give them one tool, Mike, and I'd say, build your data products here.
Right.
I would be very careful.
I think a common data fabric approach, common platform to do this on at the moment is a more practical option, because of the fact that if everybody's on this, then they can actually share metadata, because you know, whereas if everybody's just off buying their own tools, we're going to end up in a inability to see what everybody's creating, right? I mean, that's the problem.
Untenable.
You're going to have a number. You're going to have a number of tools, I think, at the end of the day in your ecosystem that are and where we're getting and where they may create data products. And that's a part of a journey. The challenge we have right now is that the businesses are not willing to wait, right? You can't say, hey, give me 2 years to build this, right?
Oh, absolutely.
We need to go in now in the next
It's a chicken and egg problem to me. It's really like what you can provide to the business side, and also on technical side, what you can really offering. It's always a negotiation, and really who convinces what, who convinces whom. To me, this is a really maybe like an agent, as you mentioned, if you can get some pilot project to show the demo, like, oh, this is what you can do, and convince the business sides, and also like if we can have some technology to show really, this is with this way we can virtualize this data, or we can provide the data as availability, and then this can be. I feel like we are in a different age right now, and this perhaps an opportunity for us to enable a better data fabric or data mesh. And I do believe also like we're not mature enough in technology side to implement the full feature, the full picture of data mesh. But I think we're getting there. Like one thing, I just want to share a little bit of story here.
Actually, real quick, and then I'll give you the last segment. But go ahead. We got 50 seconds. Go.
Sure. Yeah. So basically, I'm talking to a user and who is using like AWS a lot, and he's really sharing me like, because nowadays you create a data product is so easy on AWS and then public cloud providers. It's so easy for different teams just created their data silos, and without really company-wide rules or some enforcement, it just gets so many silos so easily. Previously, you perhaps to buy the device, buy these different services. Now it's just like, oh, get a key and then get a credential and create a service there. And then you naturally get Snowflake in the US West, then get Databricks in the US East, and maybe some other things in Europe. Yeah, we can come back to this later.
We'll pick this up after the break. Very, very good stuff. We'll be right back.
Welcome back to DM Radio. Here's your host, Eric Kavanaugh.
All right, folks, back here on DM Radio, having a very lively discussion about data mesh, and for good reason, because it really is trying to weave together all these practices that we've learned. And in the break there, Mike Ferguson made a great point. I'll throw this over to Ben, fan of Alluxio, that if you really want it to work, you have to reduce the complexity for the business. But you have to solve that. What do they say? Simple is hard, right? If you want to create something that looks simple, it's very complicated underneath, almost always. But Ben, tell us a bit about your take on this and your role from the Alluxio perspective, because these folks did something very, very interesting. Tell us what you're working on, Ben.
Thanks, Eric. So I think exactly like as you mentioned, making things simple is very hard, and that's exactly what we're working on right now in Alluxio. So I just want to continue my example, the little story I was sharing. Like the user, he's telling me like by natural, like different teams in his company is creating different data silos. Even it's all in the one single cloud in AWS, but basically different teams are buying different data products in different regions. And because there's also acquisition from the big corporation, and you will see integrated data products from other teams. And in that case, becomes a really messy situation. And you have all kinds of different tables in different locations. And there's a lot of data duplication. And also it's hard for them to really like discover who can query what. So in the end of the day, they come up with a solution, or in at least a proposal, so that like this is the central data lake. This is the central region. Like I should move all my queries there, my like tables there. So this creates simplifies the architecture to some degree, but also creates other problems. Like you have to make the pipelines to create data, to migrate data from one place to another, and this creates first latency, cost, and also perhaps data inconsistency, right? Because you may see a delay before you really fully migrate the data, latest copy of data from the original region to the or from the original data product to this data central data lake. So in this way, how can you really make sure you're seeing all these benefits, right? You have all the data replicated in different places. So we're working with them, and we're saying, okay, how about let's create a virtualization layer there? Just you have a virtualization layer for your data in different places, in different regions, or in different data products. And then you can assume by this virtualization layer, this creates this has the metadata, but it's more on the file system level, or this on the object level. Okay, with this virtualization layer, you can agnostically access data in different places and assume it's fresh enough, or this is updated enough, depends on your cost you're willing to pay to maintain the consistency. And then this creates a lot of flexibility and easiness for the maintainers in that centralized data lake, because they can just assume, oh, this is the view I have. I can just go to different places and get data. And you can have some certain machinery there to guarantee, to help me understand, to guarantee the data is updated enough. And or maybe several times that there are certain tables that are so hot, and oftentimes this is the case. You have maybe 20% of data takes more than 50% of the query traffic, and then we can just make sure this is really, for example, this is a resident or cached in close enough to the applications, so you don't have to repeatedly query the data and move the data again. So in this way, this to me, like after discussion, they are actually decided to go this route, and they are implementing this in production. And they told me this creatively, this gives them a very good flexibility, but also reduction in their cost. But more importantly, just simplifies their minds, and just having this simplification is really great. It's really, really important for them to reason the next step, and what they can do more based on this architecture. Yeah. So that's a.
Real quick, this whole the concept itself of a data product, I think, signifies maturation in this space, because we're moving beyond, talking about a database or things of this nature to a more refined, consumable product. And that's what Adrian was talking about. The consumers, talk to your consumers. What do they want? How can you help them solve problems? And I think, just real quick too, the mobile paradigm really changed a lot of our perspective about how to design user interfaces and how to design workflow. And frankly, that was the key, in my opinion, because when you have this small device now, you don't have a lot of real estate, and you have to really think very carefully about what are the possible options at any step along the way. And that's the sort of flow of screens or whatever. But to make it consumable, you really want to make it as simple as possible from a UI or UX perspective. And that's kind of where I think data mesh shines when you get that UX right. What do you think, Ben?
Yeah, so definitely, it's just like a make this more consumable is very important for the users. And like for us, actually, if we can provide this virtualization, then it's not only on the UX level and UI level, it's really on the metadata level, at least for the file system level. Metadata, this is a logical space you're accessing, and this actually can just like make this things very easy to port to different environments or to different data products. And like for example, I worked in Google before, and in Google, there's everything, all the data, all the tables, all the files. You have one single unique logical namespace, logical space for that. Like, and you can just access, you assume this is a global namespace, and you always go to there. And underlying this can be in different data centers across continents, and can be actually in different media. Some of the data is in tape. Can you imagine that? It's in tape.
Right.
And some of the data is in memory, right? But anyway, like as long as this is in the namespace, you have a single and logical space address to access that. And this actually greatly simplifies everything. Like from like writing the pipeline perspective, from writing a business logic perspective, it just simplifies the mind.
Yeah, this is really cool stuff. And Alluxio has done some very fascinating work in that space. I would recommend you guys look them up online, Alluxio, specifically with namespaces and being able to, initially, as I recall, Ben, was to leverage the power of cloud compute on your on-prem data, right? So you create a sort of a fast connection, a virtualization layer to be able to get all that data accessible to cloud compute. Which is a big part of the story these days, right? Cloud, you have scalable compute. Scalability is huge these days, and so you're kind of helping create a bridge between these two worlds, yes. And again, focus on the value to the business, right, Ben?
Yes, exactly. So having this, we're building this virtualization layer, or as I mentioned, like we're building this logical space and as a file system, and then you can. Regardless the admins, you can regardless this is really in the cloud, in AWS or in GCS or in some other in Azure, or this is on your own data warehouse. Anyway, as long as you can just put them into this logical namespace, your applications can just go do something like, oh, I'm accessing this logical file, I'm accessing this logical directory, and in the upper layer, if this is a metadata service, there's some like high meta or glue, this can point to actually can consist or can be made up as a table or a database or scheme, something like that, right? And then like I would say, like data product becomes easier to maintain, to involve, because eventually what we see is decoupling the data and decoupling the data consumer is very important for both sides to involve more faster and quickly and more scalably, because they are emphasizing on different parts of the scalability part. So to me, that is very interesting. And as I have my degree in computer science, having another indirection, or sometimes you can call this virtualization or abstraction, is always to me, this is the most interesting, very interesting part, because with abstraction, you can do more stuff behind the abstraction.
Yeah, that's right. There's an old adage in the IT world: just one new layer of abstraction can solve all our problems.
Yeah,
at least for now, right? And then we learn something else, and we learn something else, and it kind of goes around and around. Yeah. But it is very exciting stuff. I mean, and it does represent a maturation of our industry. And I think we're really at the beginning of being able to pull off this data mesh. And it is all about the business value. It's all about really opening up the channels between the business people and the data, so that you're constantly working with the information and using it as leverage, basically, to make better decisions. We're not lost in the conversation around the intricacies of the warehouse or how to fine tune the indices and all this kind of stuff. You'll still have that depending upon your environment. You're still going to need DBAs or IT people to manage things a lot more. They're going to be spending their time understanding cloud providers and what they do and how does this impact our bottom line. How does it impact performance? So DBAs, traditional IT sysadmins, don't worry, your jobs aren't going to completely disappear, but you will have to change what you're doing and focus more on on this new architecture, on this new environment, which is absolutely a reality. And no, on-prem is not going away anytime soon. There's going to be a very long tail to that stuff. But we'll do a podcast bonus segment in just 1 second, folks. You've been listening to DM Radio.